And we're live to review the episode in the title. Over to his Jeffness.
All right. This is Homicide, Life on the Street, A Doll's Eyes, which actually aired originally December 1st, 1995 on NBC, which is out of order, as NBC was wont to do during this period of the show. So it's the fourth episode in production order, but it was actually the sixth episode aired, which for various reasons makes some things confusing. But
is that why they put a date at the beginning?
They put a date at the beginning because they wanted to explain to the audience why, after previously where they're no longer in the old bank building, they're back in their squad room, all of a sudden they're back in the old bank building again. So they had to, put a date on to say, hey, this happened earlier, because, they ran it in the wrong order. So, here's a brief recap that I have not read ahead of time, so hopefully it's accurate. Patrick Garberick stands with his eyes fixated on a dinosaur exhibit at a mall. Soon his eyes close and his body hits the ground as a stray bullet strikes the young boy. Bayliss and Pembleton arrive at the scene and find shell casings in various places. The detectives head to the hospital and interview the parents of Garberick, who is clinging on to life support. The parents are obviously distraught and are now even more worried with Homicide being introduced. Fearful of their son's life, the parents make the detectives flee. Bayliss tries to convince G to take them off the sensitive case as it's not officially a homicide. Driving around, Bayliss and Pembleton chase down Tommy Porton and take him to the old bank building that they're temporarily in to grill him in the vault posing as the box. Porton says he heard a dispute in the mall between two young men fighting over a girl. After threatening to lock Porton up, he opens up and says that he was the one being chased with a gun and gives the detectives names. The episode ends with the parents of the 10-year-old Garberick struggling with the decision of taking their child off life support. Eventually, they decide to do so, donating his organs to those in need. Pembleton and Bayliss track down the boy's shooter. That's obviously a very brief recap of everything that happened. But in addition, there was one other slight side plot of Russert had tickets to see the Pope and talked briefly with Munch about that, and then with Pembleton, and actually offered the ticket to Pembleton, which he declined, and then later in the episode showed him watching on television before he took another case. And then also at the very end, the father of transplant from the deceased boy showed up to try to get information on how to contact the parents so he could thank them. And that's the basic gist of it. Obviously, more happened, but that's the basic thing here. So next I will go to our usual suspect of David B226 Morris to see what he says about this one. And he said, one of the reasons that Homicide remained a brilliant show for its 7-year run was its ability to examine one of the most critical emotions in any murder investigation, grief. Most of the time, we would only see the grief over the deceased for a few minutes, but at least once a season, the writers would take an in-depth look at the loss and pain that comes with death on those who suffer the most grievously. In season 2, the episode was Bop Gun. In season 3, it was Every Mother's Son, and this year the writers explored it in A Doll's Eyes. Now, because every murder causes a different kind of pain, there are countless reactions, but what makes A Doll's Eyes an agonizing hour of television is that, unlike the episodes I mentioned, and indeed for most episodes of the series, it is that for the majority of the episode, the victim is still alive, technically. As the doctor who examines Patrick Garberick's chart for the detectives, he has doll's eyes, a slang term in emergency medicine for being brain dead. This faces the Garabecks with an agonizing choice for their 10-year-old son, whether or not to take their son off life support so that his organs can be donated to others. The episode focuses on the tragic, and for that matter, pointless anguish of Joan and Paul Garberick. They bring their son to a shopping mall and are in the process of leaving when two teenagers run by Shots are fired, and in the process, Patrick is hit with a stray bullet, one that we never even see fired. The Garabecks then spend most of the episode in a daze as events unfold. At first, they are numbed and focus on trivial things like where their car is parked. Then when Bayliss and Pembleton come in to talk to them about the shooting, they understandably freak out when they hear the words homicide detective. Their son is alive, they argue, and it's just that reason that they are in agony. Their son is brain dead, but this is a world where medical miracles seem to be happening every other day. If they don't take their son off life support, he could exist in a vegetative state for 50 or 60 years, something that would very rapidly eat away all of their money. But to ask a parent to just let their child submit to death is a decision that no parent should have to make. Gary Basaraba, pre-Boomtown, and Marcia Gay Harden, pre-Academy Award, give absolutely wrenching performances which don't hit any false notes or go for histrionic high points. The scene where they finally turn off their son's life support is an absolutely gut-wrenching one. Even the writer of the story, Fontana, says that he was moved by that last moment. With the attention focused on the bereaved Bayliss and Pembleton find themselves investigating a crime like this, they speak for the dead, and to deal with someone living unnerves and upsets them. Both want to pass the case off to violent crimes, but G and Howard insist they follow up on it. They spend much of the episode sniping at each other over trivial things, Bayliss not picking Pembleton up, Pembleton not asking the victim's mother for her son's clothes, which are now evidence. This is business as usual for them, but it's pretty clear that they both feel a lot of distress over having to deal with this case. It doesn't help matters that this murder, like those in Bob Gunn and Every Mother's Son, was committed by children. A 16-year-old was shooting at his younger brother over an incident with his girlfriend. Again, this has a crime with no real criminals, something that we can tell pisses off both detectives to no end. Religion is not explicitly mentioned in this episode, but there is a very subtle theme. The episode occurs when the Pope is visiting Baltimore. At first, this is used for levity as Munch tries to persuade Captain Russer to sell her ticket. It becomes more serious when she offers her ticket to Pembleton and Frank refuses it. Even if he wasn't already estranged from the church, this case is not one that would reinvest one with faith in God. Eventually, Frank watches a televised broadcast of the Pope at Camden Yards. Another show might have had Frank give some kind of reaction, but all he does is look at the screen for a few seconds and then answer another call. There is no rest for the murder police. It's one tragedy after another. But for myself, the most painful part of the episode occurs when a father of the boy who received Patrick's kidney and thus saved his life wants to talk to the Garabecks to thank them for letting him have their son donate his organs. The happiness in his voice strikes such a discordant note when we realize their tragedy brought joy to this family. It is something that they will never understand and something that we, the viewer, having got caught up in these parents' lives, find hard to hear. Like most of the episodes, when Homicide does this kind of thing, it is difficult to enjoy a doll's eyes, but one cannot deny that an episode like this is what good television is all about. My score 9.7. So I've got another review thing I'm going to read some of, but I figured I'd give Ben a chance to comment on the episode here first before
Right, I've written some. I have an admission to make for this episode, Jeff, and viewers. I have an admission to make, and I've written it on here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. It made me cry, but only a little bit. I have to maintain my NT dignity after all.
And see, this episode in the past has made me cry, but it didn't when I watched it this time. But that was primarily because Morgan was watching with me and making disparaging comments at some of the most intense scenes. So not about the show, but about the characters themselves in terms of he was saying that if he was the boy and could hear them, that he would be like not liking what they were saying to him. So anyway, so he was making those comments. So it was hard it took me out of it. So, but in the past, it did affect me, a lot. It's a pretty powerful episode. And the other thing that wasn't mentioned in either that review or the recap was that there's a very brief cameo from a character from another show, the medical drama Chicago Hope. Mandy Patinkin's character, who I don't even remember the name of the doctor, is on hand to receive the heart that arrives in Chicago from the little boy, and is eating a sandwich and then grabs the heart and runs with it. So.
And I've also put on there, I don't know if you can read it.
No, I can't.
But I've misspelled her name anyway, but it should be, damn that Marcia Gay Harden for being such a good actress.
Yeah. Yeah, she's pretty effective in this, and Gary Basaraba was the dad. He does a good job, too.
Yeah,
I've seen him in several things, and mostly, actually, this was one of the few times where he was playing somebody who wasn't a cop.
Right, so now what we can do... So yeah, that's what it boils down to. Oh, yes, and I thought that was a nice addition. The fact that the just to lighten it a little bit, the idea that another boy would live because of the organs.
Yeah, it kind of has that circle of life kind of feel to it there at the end, where it reminds people that, kind of the yin and the yang, so to speak.
And these notes, folks, are for the next episode.
Okay.
Right. So
that was all the notes you had on this one, was just to say that you cried.
Well, I mean, come on, the plot's pretty simple. I mean, but what I can do is comment on. I took some grabs for this, and mainly it's Marcia. So, for instance, we have these little. So you always like me to take these little notes of who was in it, don't you, Jeff? Like the opening credits.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So we've got the names that we mentioned.
Yeah, I guess I didn't mention the writers, but you have that grabbed, so I can.
Who's Sean Whiteside? Is he the?
Probably the doctor.
You see, I actually think that it's a bit.
But I don't remember if it also could have been the kid they interviewed. I don't know. I don't remember whether his name was listed in the front cast or not.
If I was the parents and I heard the term doll's eyes, I would be so infuriated at the insensitivity of that phrase.
Well, I don't think the doctor said it to them.
I know he didn't, but
yeah. There's a lot of things like that, and we've already covered it. One of the episodes mentioned in that review earlier, Bob Gunn kind of showed that from the victim's perspective and encountering the cops who are obviously not grieving about, and kind of joking about something that obviously made a huge impact on somebody else. Okay, so the story by Fontana and Brummel and the teleplay by James Yoshimura. So this being a very different episode, it's written by the main people involved with creative team at that point. So unlike the next episode, which was a different writer, but we'll get to that when we get to that one. But
and a real hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Is there only one John Hopkins, or are there many of them?
I don't know. I know there's a Johns Hopkins University as well. So.
Yeah. So maybe it's one of those things like it was like the Carnegies, where they'd actually put their own money on something, rather than these people that get the names on something without paying for it. Right. I've forgotten who that was.
That's the doctor, which I forget his name. They didn't say it in this episode. They've said his name in a couple of previous ones, because he was also the doctor for back in the first season when the cop Chris Thorman got shot and he was blinded. He was his doctor, and I think he made at least one other appearance in the first couple of seasons.
It's almost too good looking to be believable as a doctor. He's almost like a soap opera type doctor.
Well, I will never. I can't agree with you on that, because Morgan's pediatrician could probably be like a model guy too. Like
I did put almost in there.
Yeah,
a little bit of leeway there, Jeff.
So there's some good-looking doctors out there.
Yep. Right, then we got... Of course, there's me going for the technology.
I can say you always will spot the technology.
Yeah,
the Game Boy.
And I keep on thinking, look, stuff has not moved on enough. I'm not happy. I mean, especially in the last 10 years. Not good enough. Not good enough. I mean, as I keep saying, like, there's so much technological advancement, like, say, between 95 and 2005, like, in terms of, like, internet, like, broadband, all that kind of stuff. But not that much in the last 10 years. Not that much. Just Google Hangouts. And that's really just similar to Skype. Right, so, unimpeachable acting. Flawless, shall we say?
And once again, you know, since Morgan's not here, I have to sort of speak for him in a way and point out his reactions is once again a divide. Between the two of us, is that he reacts negatively to her.
Why?
And he did the same thing to Robin Williams' character in Bop Gun. He doesn't like somebody, what he calls like throwing feelings at him. So he sort of goes into, I think he's putting himself like in the place of if he was the cop and the victim is expressing, you know, this emotions and he's reacting negatively to that. So it's a divide between us because in both cases, that episode and this one, I relating more to the parents than I do to the cops.
Well, this is an interesting character moment. So we're on a little digression here, folks. Maybe what it is with Morgan is that it's not so much that in itself. Maybe it reminds him of something in real life. And
well,
that's
yeah,
why
it's the same. He's talked about this before. Like I say, what he calls like throwing feelings or throwing emotions at him. He doesn't like that.
And we know the person that does that to him.
Well, he said multiple people do it to him, according to him. But anyway,
you know,
but yeah, but like I said, in both cases, I relate more to the victims, and a part of it is, I think, being a parent. In both cases, involved,
yeah,
you know, family that have been killed, and children involved in it, and I think that definitely makes an impact.
So,
I think parents seeing well acted parents on screen are going to have are going to relate better to that than non-parents, I think.
So when you were watching it with Morgan and he was making those comments, was it like, boy, you're really being ESTP now, son?
Yeah, pretty much. Or just being himself. I mean, but you know, yeah. I mean, there are plenty of times. That's the thing is, you know, we talk about like what's similar and different across types. I mean, and I think a lot of intuitives probably look at ESFPs and ESTPs, and they put them in one category. They use phrases like SE DOMs and things like that, and they think of that as this one group. And there are plenty of things where we see things the same way. But like we've talked about before, the split happens in the judgment of things as opposed to the perception of things.
Yes.
And so there's definitely a divide there where, you know, these cases, I'm always like going the other way, and it makes an impact on me emotionally. Whereas it's like with him, he's reacting like somebody is cornering him. Like, I know exactly what that feels like. It's just those things don't do that to me. Other things do.
You know, it's going to be a combination of maturity and the fact that I don't know what to say. I don't know what to call it in English, but we call it in Typology Town, as you call it, Jeff. We call it because I remember that phrase because I think that was the first video I saw of you, and you used the phrase Typology Town. I thought, oh, that's clever.
That came from one of the Podler guys. They're the ones that coined the Typology Town. I can't take credit for that. But.
Okay, very good. Very magnanimous. Well, not magnanimous, honest. Okay. So. Oh, why did I mention that?
Sorry, you were talking about.
Oh yes, we call it. Basically, everything to do with feelings, and like we will call like introverted feeling, like, you know, a conscience and sensitivity, things like that, and it's like the weak point for ESTPs, and so basically the weak points of Donald Trump, folks.
Yes, lacking in compassion is a thing there.
So,
And it's not, and I have to get, I have to qualify it for my own sake and say that it's not an intentional lack of compassion. I think it's just a natural, they don't
yeah,
get it the same way.
exactly. Having said,
It's just, it doesn't register the same way in their brains. Like, they don't have that, they don't connect with it the same way.
having said that, when he does articulate his point of view on it, it does sort of like be consistent from his point of view. And so it is interesting to have that point of view. So what were the types of things he was saying during the review? Oh, you're watching of it, sorry.
It was just the scene where, where they were about to take him off life support and the parents were talking to him. He was just like, he was responding as if he was the boy and saying like, I don't want to hear that, or that's terrible or something, I don't remember his exact words because I was trying to block them out and hear what they were actually saying on the show. He wasn't making me very happy, so I wasn't like hanging on his every word.
Right.
He even said, like, before we even got to that point, when he first saw the mother, he says, "I remember hating her." He said about her. Yeah,
oh, wow.
and you see, as the review mentioned, the effect the case has on Pembleton and Bayliss, and again, they have different reactions, but they're, unlike Morgan, they're both feeling types. So they definitely do have an emotional connection with this, but they do it in slightly different ways, of course.
And like I said, Pembleton is very well lit here. Because there was one British series called Doctors that was terrible at lighting darker skinned people. It really was. They really were bad.
Oh, I think I've had those popping up in my YouTube feed lately. Is it The Doctors? Or is it
No,
Doctor?
Doctor. There's just this rubbish BBC soap type thing that's on in the afternoon.
Well, this is a soap opera that I'm talking about because one of my subscriptions, because of other soap stuff I subscribe to, and he hasn't like posted anything for a while, but all of a sudden lately he's been uploading a bunch of this thing called The Doctors. So I wonder if it's the same thing.
Yeah, and because because they don't have individually lit shots. Like here, I mean, like this would have taken ages to like arrange the lighting so you can pick out the whole of his face, even though the background is dark. So,
yeah, you have Pembleton reacting to, things that the little minor irritations that become blown up in the with the emotions of the case, like the having to pay for the cab and the stuff like that.
Yeah, but he's like pissed off the fact that the other guy doesn't believe him. But I actually think, on a technical point of view, I think Pembleton is better lit at night than in previous seasons.
Maybe so. They increased the lighting overall from previous season, which actually is mentioned in this other review I'm going to read here.
Okay, there's not really much to. I thought this was poor from Kyle Seacole. It's like, because now what you can Barry Van Dyke is not a very good actor, but at least he had good gun technique in Diagnosis Murder. He always had the double grip. Always the double grip.
I don't know if you took. Did you take any pictures of the two kids, the brothers?
No, one of them was a bit too spotty for me.
Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to mention before I forgot that, as I've mentioned before, I think Homicide does a good job casting.
Yeah, they were believable. Yeah.
And I'm sure that you'll probably get this when I ask the question, but I'm going to ask this rhetorical question for the audience. But I'm asking it for you. What did these two teenagers have that 95% of teenagers on television never have?
Acne.
Yes.
In fact,
on TV, the teenagers always have this clear skin. And another thing that adds to the realism is they actually had teenagers with acne.
Yes, and they didn't cover it up with. And the first teenager had pretty bad acne. And I've been there.
Yeah, so that's another thing where, detail that the show is good at is, we're not casting, we're not bringing in 90210 extras as our teenagers.
Although that first guy would have been very good looking with clear skin.
Yeah, but I mean, he looked like a real kid. That's the thing, is that it makes such a difference when you aren't immediately taken out of it by having unrealistic characters in terms of looks or the acting.
So, Jeff, which thumbnail do you recommend? This one or this one?
Yeah, I guess I'd go with that one.
Yeah. Right, okay. The kiss rather than that one.
Yeah, I mean, they're both fine, but...
Yeah, I think the kiss is a little bit more, yeah. That would probably be Morgan's least favourite. Oh, well.
Maybe so.
We make allowances for ESTPs, especially young ones.
Yeah, and like I said, he didn't in any way bash the quality of the episode. That's the thing, is he still recognizes that it's good drama, despite him having a reaction to the game. In fact, that almost even goes further to prove it that the characters are realistic enough that he's responding as if they were real people.
Yeah. I mean, I think
that's
good. I think obviously it's what it is because he has a negative association with that emotion, because he gets that at him quite a lot, and that's what the thing is. So he's a good person at heart, folks. Although Jeff doesn't believe in that, he believes in good and bad actions.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, I didn't bring that up to bash Morgan anyway, and like I said, his review of the episode, to the extent that he gave one, was praiseworthy in terms of the things he said about it. So, and obviously he had, enjoyed plenty of the other scenes that didn't involve the parents, which there were some. I mean, the interaction with Pembleton and Bayliss, he, usually liked. And usually, here's the interesting thing, usually would side with Pembleton, because as in some things, temperament trumps, functions, or whatever you want to say about it.
Yeah, I believe that as well.
Whereas, even though Morgan might say that he relates to extroverted feeling more than introverted feeling, he still sides with Pembleton over Bayliss on the artisan-guardian divide. So,
although ESFPs do use a lot of FE to be the centre of attention and entertain people, and their general charm, their mode of operation. Same with ENFPs. However, so I suppose this is another example of a good episode where we can't find much wrong with it, and therefore we don't have that much to say. Except, darn you, Marsha Gay Hayden. Pardon.
Well, I do have a little more to say because I was going to read just a little bit of this other review.
Excellent.
Yeah, there's a site called avclub.com, so this is where I'm getting this from, and they actually reviewed, different TV shows, but they did multiple episodes of Homicide, including this one. So I'm going to start out reading this. I may end up skipping some of it rather than reading the whole thing, but I'll read some of it. So it starts, imagine it's a Friday night, let's say December 1st, 1995. A husband and wife go out to their favorite Mexican restaurant with their children, then head home to put the kids to bed. The couple is full of fajitas, margaritas, and familial goodwill. They snuggle up on the couch to watch one of their favorite shows, Homicide: Life on the Street. By the end of the hour, they're sobbing, feeling depressed about the transience of human relationships and the looming specter of our common mortality. So, a good way to start the weekend? The Homicide episode, A Doll's Eyes, aired toward the beginning of the show's fourth season, well after NBC had given the Homicide producers a mandate to become more viewer-friendly. The first episode of Homicide aired in January of 1993, immediately after the Super Bowl, and was seen by more than 18 million people, many of whom never watched again. Among those who stuck around for episode 2 were critics, award show voters, and the NBC programmers who kept the show on the air through 7 years of low ratings. Also among the loyal fans, television creators who quickly pilfered Homicide's handheld camera-derived immediacy, its caustic wit, and its emphasis on the mundane details of crime solving. Filmmaker Barry Levinson film critic turned screenwriter Paul Attanasio and TV writer-producers Tom Fontana and James Yoshimura adapted Homicide from a nonfiction book about the operation of a Baltimore homicide detective squad written by David Simon, who would later go on to create The Wire. From the first episode, the creators established Baltimore itself as a character, from the inner city bars and crab shacks to the posh suburban mansions. The cast clicked right away, too, especially Kyle Secor as an oversensitive novice detective and Andre Brower as his hotshot partner. Okay, this is... Well, anyway, Homicide's 9-episode first season and 4-episode second season sported a darker look and tone than later seasons, when network pressure pushed more action sequences and master criminals into the picture. But throughout the show's run, crimes would go unpunished, justice would prove elusive, and the writers would use the commonplace to get at the big questions of what it means to sort through the debris of murder. Even the opening credits for the first 4 seasons are jarring, just a surreal, impressionistic montage showing extreme angles of Baltimore row houses, police station desks, and one metaphorically vicious dog, all set to a soundtrack of electronic shredding and high rapid percussion. By the time the cast list comes around, the image totally breaks down, reduced to blurry streaks of light before ending on a reversed picture of a homicide department door. Has the world gone topsy-turvy? Is life flashing before some victim's eyes? Or is it just another day of mayhem in Balmer? Back in the mid-90s, I was friends with a guy who heard I'd started watching Homicide in the middle of its 3rd season with the episode The City That Bleeds, as I recall, and he made sure to let me know that the show had been going downhill from the moment its lighting improved. No matter how dark Homicide would get over the years, and this is a show where the cops drank too much, murdered suspects in cold blood, and explored the extremes of their sexual desires, there were always longtime fans who'd complain that the cast has gotten too pretty and the cases too TV-ish. Homicide was tough once, they'd say, then it got different. What then to make of A Doll's Eyes? Directed by former TV news producer Kenneth Fink and written by Yoshimura from a story by Fontana and Henry Brommel, A Doll's Eyes is a tough hour of television by just about anyone's standard. It's riveting and mood-changing, a contemplation of fate, miracles, and the blurry line between life and death, and it's unsparing in its dramatization of tragedy. The episode opens with a married couple, not unlike the pair in my opening What If, out at the mall with their 10-year-old son, Patrick. The scene cuts between someone running through the mall and Patrick ignoring his mother's demand that he tear himself away from a storefront dinosaur display. The soundtrack and image shift drastically depending on the perspective. With Patrick and his mother, all is calm. With the fleeing man, the image blurs and the soundtrack fills with loud, propulsive percussion. Then there's a gunshot and Patrick falls to the ground. For all its occasional sensationalism, Homicide was in essence a drama about how ordinary people cope with the extraordinary. A Doll's Eyes makes that division explicit through its story structure, which shows a seemingly happy family shattered by the thoughtless violence of an unhappy one. Later, we learn that the shooter at the mall was chasing his brother as part of a dispute over a girl. The division continues as the Garbericks navigate the nightmare of hospitals and an empty house, while detectives Pembleton and Bayliss investigate the crime. The episode is fairly evenly split between the Garbericks, played by Marcia Gay Harden and Gary Basaraba, and the detectives. In the early going, while Patrick is in surgery, Joan and Paul reassure themselves that he's going to be fine and fret over trivialities like whether their car is parked in a tow-away zone. Later, back home, after Patrick's fallen into a coma and showing no brain activity, Joan insists on making eggs even when Paul's not hungry. Then she washes Patrick's bloody clothes, unaware that the cops need them as evidence. Meanwhile, Pembleton and Bayliss go about their business, bothered more by the run-of-the-mill annoyances of their job than they are by the imminent death of a 10-year-old boy. When we first see them in the episode, they're talking about the weather and debating whether there's humidity in hell. Later, when we find out that Patrick is still alive but brain dead, that he has a doll's eyes, according to the doctor, the partners want to pass the case off to the Violent Crimes Division, but their competitive, clearance-obsessed cohort, Sergeant K. Howard, played by Melissa Leo, doesn't like the idea of them taking a red name off the board so quickly. While the Garbericks come to grips with the possibility that they'll never hear their son's voice again, Pembleton and Bayliss are listening to their colleagues chit-chatting about the Pope's upcoming visit to Camden Yards and enduring their bitching that all the ice cube trays in the kitchen are empty. Those two worlds collide a few times throughout the episode. When Pembleton and Bayliss first stop by the hospital to get a statement from the Garbericks, Paul is confused as to why homicide detectives would want to talk to them. And his confusion isn't helped by the simultaneous arrival of doctors asking for the Garbericks' signature on forms related to Patrick's condition. Paul gets agitated, and Bayliss grabs at him, but immediately feels bad about it, not because he was out of line, but because while reaching for Paul, he hurt his back. Later, Pembleton returns to the hospital after Patrick settled into his coma and tries to ask Joan about the clothes she washed, but finds she has no interest in the investigation. The weight of her responsibilities and the randomness of the incident have come crashing in on her, and she starts yelling at Pembleton and at Patrick. He has to see the dinosaurs, she says. He has to go to that window. So the two camps disengage again. Pembleton and Bayliss track down a pimple-faced kid named Tommy Porton who may have witnessed the shooting. They get him in the interrogation room and launched into their well-honed shtick. Two slick-talking cops playing on a suspect's worst fears. Bayliss goes off on a tangent about how he doesn't have a nickname like Tommy and how that pisses him off. Then he tells Tommy that Patrick doesn't have a nickname either. Together, Pembleton and Bayliss shake Tommy's tree enough that he cracks and confesses that his brother Donnie is the shooter. Pembleton, feeling biblical, opines younger brother gives up older brother, variation on a theme. During all this, the Garbericks suffer in silence around each other, afraid to have the conversation about whether they should take Patrick off life support and let his organs go to kids who need donors. Finally, they agree to say goodbye in an absolutely brutal scene that has Joan first wanting to put off the decision one more day before Paul reminds her it won't be any easier tomorrow. The homicide team doesn't spare the audience any of the painful details of the Garbericks' farewell to Patrick. Joan's taken aback that the child is still warm when she touches his face. Paul asks that the doctors let her hold Patrick while they switch off his machines, but they only allow the parents 15 seconds. So Joan quickly takes Patrick into her arms, says, "Thank you for being my son," and cradles him as he flatlines. Throughout the scene, the beeping of the life support equipment and the hovering medical staff send a clear message. This decision is irrevocable. I repeat, is this an enjoyable way to spend a Friday evening in front of the television? Why would anyone want to put themselves through the emotional wringer of a doll's eyes? I can think of a few reasons. First off, unlike a lot of television then or now, Homicide: Life on the Street was attuned to the visual possibilities of the medium, thanks largely to its frequent cinematographer and occasional director, Jean de Segonzac. Note the framing of that shot of Pembleton and Bayliss grilling Tommy Porton. Bayliss's face is out of the frame, but his hand is right on Tommy's throat, while Pembleton and his ever-present cigarette emit a halo of hellish smoke behind the boy's close-up, blemished face. Or note the way the decor in the hospital hallway reflects an alien external world where people look forward to the fall weather and the holidays, even as the patients and their families inside the building endure some of the worst moments of their lives. Underlining that theme, there's a brief shot in that same hallway earlier in the episode in which we see a janitor casually mopping up a trail of blood, while Bayliss and Pembleton walk by, not at all concerned about what put that blood there in the first place. Later, after a long conversation about impossible choices, the camera cuts to a sun setting behind Baltimore, in a shot that lasts about 30 seconds. It's not an establishing shot either, it's strictly a mood setter, and a theme reinforcer. This is an episode about transitions, after all. Or study the composition of the scene where Bayliss tracks, finds, and apprehends Tommy Porton. The quick cut mix of close-up, medium, and long shots conveys the adrenaline rush of the moment, the immediate reactions of the characters, and the flavor of the city where all this is taking place. It also reminds us that Bayliss's back injury is still bothering him, and it contains one of those multiple takes of the same instant routines that was all the rage among movie and TV editors in the mid-90s, in part because Homicide did it so well. Just on a visual level, A Doll's Eyes is a pleasure. It's also a pleasure to listen to the dialogue, which is often funny and worldly wise. Early in the episode, when Pembleton and Bayliss are interviewing witnesses at the mall, one old man claims that the shooter bumped him and made him spill his lemonade all over his pants, though he quickly admits that it ain't all lemonade. And one woman, pressed to describe the suspects, keeps saying they were regular before she concedes to Pembleton that what she really means is that they were white guys. Pembleton and Bayliss also talk circles around each other, whether they're arguing about who owes whom money or breaking down the finer points of where to keep a wallet. Homicide's banter isn't realistic per se, it's more in the mode of David Mamet, Quentin Tarantino, or other writers who love the outsized rhythm of language, especially when spoken by tough guy types. Often the dialogue is mannered and quirky in a way that made Homicide feel fresh at the time, but now comes off a little forced, though not cripplingly so, at least to me. A Doll's Eyes also features multiple conversations that confront the issues of the episode head-on, which was a fairly common approach to storytelling among the genre-bound dramas of the mid-90s. The difference in this case is that Homicide worked those debates about the issues of the day into more casual conversations, rather than two lawyers standing up in a conference room or courtroom and shouting their opinions about how best to preserve the dignity of human life. Homicide has Pembleton dismissing Bayliss's passing thought that Patrick might make it by saying, "How's he going to make it? He has no brain function. Where's he going to make it to?" And when the partners finally track down and arrest Donnie Porton for Patrick's murder, Donnie argues that he shouldn't be charged with that crime because he wasn't the one who switched off the life support. All of these scenes are marvelously well acted, too. Another way that Homicide is enjoyable, even when it's ripping viewers' guts out. Considering the long, winding scene that anchors A Doll's Eyes, Pembleton and Bayliss head back to the Garber's house to retrieve Patrick's clothes. Joan and Paul haven't made their final decision about Patrick yet, so Joan plies Bayliss with coffee in the kitchen so that she'll have someone to talk to about why she thinks it's wrong to let Patrick die and become an organ donor. While outside, Paul tells Pembleton that he hopes Donnie resists arrest so the cops have to hurt him or kill him. The couple talks about the cost of Patrick's care and how this incident has brought home to them that they have nothing in common anymore. When the heavy stuff's out of the way, they talk about the weather and gardening. The scene lasts about 5 minutes, split between two locations, and the performances are as subtle, graceful, and affecting as the dialogue is blunt. After it's over, and after that long sunset shot I mentioned earlier, Pembleton and Bayliss get back in their car in the darkness and drive away, yelling at each other about old debts, their irritation at the Garberic's neediness, and their own differing opinions about end-of-life care. Bayliss cites the miracles at Lourdes and wonders if he could do what the Garberic's are about to do. In short, the partners have lost all their casualness about this case. They came into it all breezy, and now they're rattled. And I'm going to skip some because it's getting a little long here. But there's some stuff about Munch and Russard's conversation. Anyway, it says, as an experiment, I watched A Doll's Eyes with my wife for the first time since we watched it together back in 1995. No, we weren't the couple from the opening paragraph. We were unmarried and childless back then. She had some work to do, so I put the DVD in saying, well, since you're working, I'll go ahead and watch this and take notes for the column. But I was also taking notes on her. 10 minutes in, I noticed she was looking at her laptop less and at the screen more. By the time the Garberic's pulled the plug on their son, she was a wreck. She had no idea what she was in for when the evening began. At 9 o'clock, all smiles. At 9:50, destroyed. That's how quickly everything can change. So, yeah, that's the end of that. But
one thing I'll say, though, if I was
go ahead.
watching this and not doing it for a review, as soon as it started to get dark, I would have stopped watching it because it's just too dark. Because I used to be really into tragedy and stuff and this kind of thing to such an extent that I even studied it. I even got a book on Aristotle's Poetics, and at the time it was the most in-depth version of English. So I was really into tragedy. And the catharsis of going through those dark, it's just something I'm not into now because it's just too painful to have that.
And that's why it's good, us sort of, doing the reviews and getting each other to continue to watch things we wouldn't normally, because like I said before, with Blake 7, there's things that would have made me turn it off, obviously too, but I haven't. There was one thing I wanted to note, if I think of it, when they were talking about the sunset establishing shot. Oh yeah, I know what it was. In a previous review in Fire, I think it was part 1 of Fire, I mentioned that they seem to be using as sort of filler this following the body as it went from different, morgue to the funeral home or whatever. There was this kind of extended thing that didn't really add anything to it. I think the contrast of that was in this episode where you had the scenes where they showed the organs being divided up and boxed up and taken to the places. To me, there was a purpose for that in terms of showing what was happening to that.
Yes.
Because you don't really see that on TV that often. Even on medical shows, there's not usually a whole lot of time spent on, different organs going different places for transplant. So I liked that part.
Yeah, that was very good. That was also because the audience was emotionally invested by that point. Oh yes, there was an interesting scene towards the end where Marcia Gay Harden's character wanted to go to bed with her husband, and that could be interpreted many ways. Or maybe she wants another child.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw it as
many different ways to interpret that.
Yeah, that she wanted to be with him
Yeah.
Was more, not about about sex as it was about just,
Yeah.
him being with her, at that time.
And of course,
And so
all of those things can be true at the same time.
Well, true, and I emotionally connected with that too, because my thought was, I'm like the audience member with the melodrama, like, come on, go up to bed with your wife. I mean, she needs you. Why are you just sitting there reading a magazine?
Yeah, I was thinking, she's more attractive than you are, mate.
Yeah, but obviously, I can put myself in the situation and say, oh, I would do this, but I obviously don't know under those circumstances exactly what I would do, how I would handle my grief in that situation. That was the other thing. Morgan made some comment about, when he was talking about, I wouldn't want them doing that if I was that kid, and he said something about, something about with his luck, that's how I end up dying or something like that. And I said, well, hopefully not. I definitely don't wish that for you. So I said, well, at least one thing is that you've already lived longer than that boy did. So,
So it's basically saying, Morgan, is you don't want your parents upset that you're dead.
Well, it's not that. That's not what he said. He just doesn't want the goodbye scene. Of course, the reality of it was, in terms of how it was presented, is that Patrick probably couldn't hear them. There was no, they said no brain function, so there wouldn't have mattered what they said. But Morgan phrased it as if, oh, if it was me, I would be able to hear him, and it would be terrible. I'd be lying there thinking, shut up.
I just think what it is with Morgan is, like, every time he sees strong emotion, it connects him to, like, situations in his real life.
Yeah, probably
and
so.
That's what it is. It's like an anchor.
I mean,
right,
and that's, I certainly have situations in which I can get upset at fictional characters for some of their emotional outbursts, but not in a situation like this, with the parents having very natural reactions to this happening to their child. So that I was definitely feeling for them, not against them.
Yeah, it's basically, irrespective of the plot, it's the strong emotion, I reckon.
Yeah.
Right, so I think that's about it, folks, because we've got to get on to the next one because we want to watch Blake 7.
So, what rating would you give this episode, Ben?
Oh, dearie me. You see, in itself, I would say it's like a 9 or a 10 in itself. But it's like... But that sort of thing, like that tragedy stuff, I would have liked it more when I was more in that mode a few years ago. But I can objectively say it's an 8 or a 9. I mean, the acting really did bump it up. I'll give it about a 9.
And I will also give it a 9. It's not one of my very favorite episodes, but it's a very solid, episode and a good example of a lot of the little details and things that make Homicide a very good character drama. So, including good casting.
Yes, excellent casting. It's just that I just think the series would be a little bit better if it had less Homicide in
it. Well, some of them do. So anyway, on that note, join us next time for Heartbeat, a very different style episode, which I'm looking forward to talking to Ben about. So.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye.